right. Looks like we're going to get going here just about a minute early. Um, Go ahead and click over here to YouTube, make sure it's going to work. And it looks like we should be good to go. So good afternoon and welcome to Preparing for Prosperity. I am AJ Harrison. Today is November 20th, 2023, and we're here for our second live stream. My voice is still a little off from being sick. I'm still working on getting my lungs and everything back to healthy after being sick for so long. And I'm probably going to be transitioning to some different daily inhaler medication for my asthma. So that's what's going on there. It is Monday before Thanksgiving, and what better thing to talk about than Thanksgiving itself and turkey? Wednesday is going to be the freeze dryer podcast, and I didn't want to make that all Turkey Day stuff, and I wanted to do a live, and I'm not going to do the freeze dryer content live for right now. I don't think. I want to do my lives on Mondays and Fridays. That way, as the week gets chaotic, I can kind of schedule and part that in between. So back in the tiny house here, got some work done on it this weekend. Not as much as I would like to, but it's just kind of the way things go. So exit out of this other live stream here so that I can try to save a little bandwidth. So we're going to talk turkey today, and it's kind of punny, but I want to talk about 3 different ways to smoke a turkey. I've been cooking turkeys for a long time, and every year for the past, I believe it's 3 years, for Memorial Day, I'm doing 10 turkeys with the mobile kitchen for the church that we go to. They do a Memorial Day fundraiser type turkey dinner. They don't really make much money on it, but it's kind of a community outreach event. So I've cooked a lot of birds, especially in the last few years. So if you are still undecided on how you're going to cook your turkey this year, or maybe just looking at a couple other things and ways to do it, maybe this will help. So 3 ways to smoke a bird today. First, we have smoked. Second, we have baked, a little more traditional. And third is deep fried, which was very popular, and now it's kind of gaining popularity again. And some considerations, some preparation stuff, and then a couple notes at the end. So before we do that, want to chat about this weekend and what I did and did not get done. We're still dealing with the flu-ish thing in the house, and Sarah is still very much not back up to par yet. And I'm not really either, but so it was a fairly lethargic weekend around the house. I spent Friday night not really being able to breathe very well. So Saturday was a very lazy day, just because when you can't breathe, you can't function. And I have this huge project to get finished up, but it doesn't do any good to work on a project when you're out of gas and you can't concentrate because you got the brain fog going. So I got a lot of the pre-filling finished up. I did not get this corner back here. Where is it? Right up there. I did not get that one finished. And then I need to finish pre-filling this corner here before it gets the corner trim on. But we're looking pretty good otherwise to switch from the hot mud and go to the standard taping mud. This is probably the part of the project that I hate the most. I'm not good at this. I don't enjoy doing it. It's different when you enjoy doing something that you're horrible at. We call that a hobby sometimes. But when you despise doing a task and that's the task at hand, I'm dragging my feet a little bit and I'm having a hard time pushing through. I did not meet my deadline of Friday last week. And I'm not super happy about that, but we're going to move on. And my goal for this week is to just keep pushing and get as far as I can before the weekend. I did reach out and schedule some help laying flooring and hopefully doing the electrical trim out and a couple other things, which is going to light a fire under me, because when I schedule that out and have people committed to helping me, I tend to put a little bit more priority on things that way. So that's what's kind of going on. My sons are flying to Denver this weekend, or actually tomorrow, and they're going to spend Thanksgiving with their dad. And my oldest son is going to be with his mom this year for Thanksgiving. So we've got a fairly light house. Let me reach down and turn this heater off here. All right. I don't know if you can hear that, but I'd hate for the gurgling to be in the background the entire time. So we have basically a 3-person household this Thanksgiving. And in the past, we really haven't done much of a Thanksgiving. It's one of those things where when most of the family's not there, there's not a lot of drive and desire to do it. And this year I said, screw it. We're going to just kind of go for it all in. Had a free turkey in the freezer already. So that is on the, it's in the sink in a pot thawing. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today is if you don't have your turkey thawed, we've got a couple options for you that are actually food safe, not just sticking it on the counter to thaw, because then you get into bacteria issues. But we'll talk about that later. So we're going to do a 17-pound bird. We're going to do non-corn stuffing because I can't have corn with my asthma. It really triggers it. We've got cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, gravy, the whole 9 yards. I don't know if we're going to have a pumpkin pie or not. We'll see. I do need to run to town. I might just kind of, use the pitch and putt and go to Costco and get a pumpkin pie if they still have one. It's not the best, but it's not the worst. And then, of course, we'll have fresh homemade whipped cream because that Cool Whip stuff and that stuff out of the can sucks. So we'll dive right into the the 3 different ways of cooking the turkey that I want to talk about. So I'm going to go over kind of the base cooking setup first, and then we'll go into a couple considerations, and then I'm going to go backwards to prep, because the prep kind of depends on how you want to cook it. And so there's no sense in doing a couple of the prep things if you're going to cook it a different way. So I'm a big fan of smoking things. I run Pit Boss pellet grills. I absolutely love them. I have I have a horizontal one, and then I have a couple of vertical cabinets, and I'm really loving my Series 7 that I got this year. It's fantastic. The heat retention is great. I love the shelves in it, everything like that. So when smoking, especially with pellet smokers, you can really tweak your flavor of your bird depending on what kind of pellets you use. I use a lot of mesquite, but I cook a lot of beef. I do primarily beef smoking for the catering. And so I literally have hundreds of pounds of those pellets sitting around. But when it comes to turkey, I like to dial it back a little bit on the smoke and go with something like a hickory or a competition blend, and maybe even throw a little bit of apple or cherry in there, because you want the smoky flavor. You want a nice smoke ring, but you definitely don't want that like heavy duty smoke, because it doesn't complement the bird very well and it gets overpowering. So, and I'm a big fan of a lot of smoke. I don't just use the smoker to cook it. I want that quarter inch smoking, especially in a bird. And so a lot of times we'll go into smoking and go lower and slower to get a little bit more smoke. But if you've never smoked a bird before, a chicken, a turkey, anything like that, you'll figure out really quickly that that's not the way to do it, because you're going to have really rubbery, chewy, just nasty skin. The meat will be fantastic still, but the skin kind of sucks. And so the skin's a big part. The skin's one of my favorite parts. So that would be my recommendation with that. A little bit lighter on the pellets. Crank that thing up to 270, 275, 300, especially when you first put the bird in there. And you can drop it down to 250 and roll it through the entire cook there. And And that's going to give you really nice. It's going to be 13 to 14-ish minutes per pound on the bird. And that's going to be dependent on your weather, where you're at. The outside temperature is really going to dictate. The colder it is outside, the hotter your smoke box needs to be, because it's going to lose heat through convection. To what your smoker actually is. If you're running a pellet smoker versus an offset smoker or a chip smoker, something like that, they're all going to be a little bit different, but they're going to be 13 to 14 minutes per pound on average. And so smoking is a fantastic option. And I think that's actually where we're leaning this year, but I'm going to kind of tweak it a little bit, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So then you get back to your standard kind of old-fashioned traditional baked bird. And it's kind of your quintessential on the table bird. You're going to bake it at 350 for 13, 14 minutes a pound. I really like to crank the temperature up to about 425 once you hit that kind of half an hour prior to being done mark. And that's going to change with what your pull temperature is going to be. But that last half an hour, I really like to crank that temperature up a little bit when you're cooking it in the oven. And that's going to give you that really like firm, crisp skin that's got that excellent color to it. And a little hint, little trick. If you don't have, you need to cook the bird on a rack to keep it kind of out of the juices. You want to baste the bird as you're cooking it, but you don't want to boil the bird. And so if you set that bird right on the bottom of the pan, all the drippings and everything are just going to kind of make the bottom part soggy, where and kind of unappetizing looking. So you need to have, if you can, a rack in the bottom. And if you don't have a rack, a really simple thing to do is take a couple long carrots, and you're going to orient them back and forth in kind of a zigzag pattern across the bottom, and then cook the bird right on top of it. Those carrots are going to cook really nicely. They're going to be fantastically flavored and get all that ooey gooey into them. And also the bottom of the bird is going to be allowed to get crisp, and it's going to cook a lot more evenly. So that's a little trick there for that. Now, the third way to cook them is going to be, kind of the cool kid way to do it. And that's going to be to deep fry it in the turkey boiler. And while it is tasty, it is especially dangerous. And being a volunteer firefighter for 20 plus years, I have personally seen where that has gone awry. And we've not had any houses or anything burned down because of it, but we've definitely been called for it for fires. Let me just a second here. So safety needs to be of the utmost priority with that. And there's a couple tips that you can use if you're kind of ahead of the ball on it to make sure that you're not going to have an issue. One that I really like is if your turkey is still in its original package, go ahead and take and stick the pot that's going to be for the turkey boiler, and then fill it with water till it's about an inch over the legs, or the highest part, depending on if you're cooking it up or down. And that's going to depend on your rack. But that's going to give you your level of where you need to fill the oil to. And it's going to make it really hard for that thing to actually kind of overflow. Now, you can still boil it over pretty easily with moisture, but that's going to keep you from dunking a bird in there and finding out that either one, you have 4 inches shy and you need to add a bunch of oil, or putting the bird in there and figuring out that, while it's way overflowed and you need a couple inches on the top for boiling that oil, and for it to roll and kind of dissipate as it goes. So things to kind of keep in mind. So that's an excellent trick. If you have already opened your bird and that's not an option anymore, it's not the end of the world. What I would recommend doing at that point is underfilling it slightly, heating that oil initially to 375 to 400 degrees. And then when you add your bird to it, you can top it up with some extra oil. And that'll work out pretty good for you. It's not as ideal, but it's definitely better to be underfilled than overfilled, because overfilled, now you're trying to figure out how to get oil out of there, and it just turns into a mess and a wreck. So when you do that, best thing to do, like I said, heat that oil to 375. you should have an independent temperature thermometer for your oil and for your meat. And I really like my digital probes have the cord coming out of them. They're corded instead of cordless. I stuck them in the fryer before multiple times and never had an issue. If you use the wireless like meter brands and stuff like that, I don't know that they're rated for going into oil. So that's something to keep in mind, because they're super cool for doing your smoking and baking in the oven and all that kind of stuff. But it would be a shame to ruin one of those, and possibly the bird as well, by sticking it in the fryer. So 375 for the oil, and it's going to drop. So get your oil up to 375. Shut the propane off. Extinguish the flame. That way, if it does boil over at all, you're not going to have. You're just going to have a big mess of oil that you need to now address, versus having oil in contact with flames. Big fire, big smoke. Fire department called. Yeah, not great. Nobody wants to call 911, and 911 doesn't want to, firefighters don't want to respond to your house, especially because most of the country, like something like 85% of the country is volunteer firefighters, which means when you call 911, people are dropping what they're doing to go to your house, to go respond to your emergency. And while that's all fine and dandy, and we're happy to do that, otherwise we wouldn't volunteer. Being smart and avoiding having to call 911 means that I don't have to leave my family's Thanksgiving festivities to go put out your fire because you were an idiot. So, like I said, we haven't had to do that very much, but I've seen so many videos and done so many trainings that are nationally done about just turkey fryer fires. So shut that heat off, or shut the ignition off. Go ahead and slowly enter that bird into the oil. And then once that bird is in there, there's that residual heat in there is going to cause it to start kind of doing the boil fry thing. And then once that's going on, you can go ahead and relight it. Bring that oil back up to 350. Maintain that 350 as close, as close to as possible. A little lower, a little higher is not the end of the world. You don't want to be going up to 425 and then dropping down to 250 and big fluctuations, because it's really going to change your cook time. So fryers are going to cook between 3 and 4 minutes per pound. So it's far the fastest way to cook. It's also one of the most expensive, especially with the cost of oil right now. If you're going to do that, your bird needs to be well thawed ahead of time. If your bird is still frozen right now, even partially frozen on Monday, it's time to start thinking about how to make sure that thing's completely thawed, and it needs to be completely dried, because oil and water don't mix. That being said, when you set up your fryer, you want to have a chemical fire extinguisher available. ABC is the most common. That's the little numbers or little letters in like the builder blocks on the side. That's going to put out a grease fire. Water is not going to put out a grease fire. It's really tempting, like, oh yeah, I got a hose here, I'll just do whatever. That's going to make a crappy situation really crappy. So that's kind of my thoughts on deep frying a bird. I love a deep fried turkey. It is fantastic. The skin is amazing. The juiciness is always on point. I just can't typically get over the cost of the oil and all the stuff that's in it. That's what I do often. Plus, smokers low and slow. You stick that bird in there, and you have your oven to cook all your other stuff in, and everything just kind of flows easier. So that's the reason my preferred is going to be to smoke it. Plus, that's my wife's favorite, and so it's my wife's favorite, and I enjoy it. That's what we're doing. Couple things to consider if you are going to deep fry that bird. Consider how much propane you have in that propane tank today or tomorrow, not on Thursday. The only places that are going to be open on Thursday are going to be the exchange places. They're the worst value for propane, and the tanks are actually full of the cage, that how much propane they're actually putting in there, and that goes by weight. And so, you're only typically ever getting, a propane tank is full at 80% because it has to have the room above the liquid propane in order to vaporize. So 80% is absolutely full. Most of the time, those are about 50%. So definitely not a great value. And you definitely don't want to run out of propane when you got the bird in the fryer, because then the whole thing is just going to turn into a fiasco. So consider that that propane tank level today. And like I said, if it's not all the way thawed right now, we're getting really close. If that's today by accident, I would really, really recommend going a different route, because getting that bird thawed in a safe manner in that amount of time to make sure that you're not going to have the big, huge boil over that happens with all the liquid, it's definitely something to consider. So now that we've got the 3 ways I like to cook the bird out of the way, I want to talk about preparations and base preparations. I like to brine my turkey at least 24 hours prior to cooking it. And the brine consists of a 1/4 cup of kosher salt, a 1/4 cup of brown sugar per quart of water. And so I take a big pot, I add 2 gallons of water to it. I put 2 cups of salt in there, 2 cups of brown sugar, bring it up to a simmer, and just kind of make sure that everything is cohesively incorporated. Because if you just even add warm water to the salt, it's not going to completely mix. But if you bring it up to to somewhat hot, even to a simmer briefly, it's going to cause that salt to really kind of turn into that saline solution that you're looking for. And the salt is going to do a couple things. It's going to start breaking down proteins, making them more tender, help to lock in the moisture, as well as draw the moisture out of the skin. So you're going to get the crispiness of the skin. So at least 24 hours beforehand. And that turkey takes up quite a bit of space. I like to use a cooler for that. I've got I want to say it's a 45 quart cooler, Yeti style. I don't know. It's a Grizzly or something or other. My dad was nice enough to buy it for me for my birthday a few years ago, and I have loved it ever since. So I make the brine, get it cooled down, get the bird into the ice chest, and then add the cooled off brine, and then add some ice to it. Close the lid, let it sit for 24 hours. A really good cooler, especially the roto molded ones, are going to hold that bird with that ice, no problem. People say to bring that turkey out and let it come up to room temperature before you're cooking it. Don't do that. The meat shouldn't, the bird should never be on the counter for that amount of time, especially a poultry product. Salmonella, E. coli, stuff like that is going to be a lot more prevalent in a bird, especially if it came from a processing facility that's not a homegrown bird. There's so many things that you can get away with when you raise that bird because it hasn't been through the mass conglomerate scale sized processing facility where E. coli, listeria, salmonella, all that stuff comes from. So if you're using a store-bought bird, don't leave it on the counter. If you want to leave it on the counter for an hour or so to finish letting it drip dry so you can pat it dry, that's cool. But in food service, we run off of TCS, which is time and temperature safety controls. And you shouldn't have anything raw out above the 40-degree mark for more than 4 hours total in its whole life. So if you've thawed it in the sink or whatever, you're really kind of getting into that danger that comes to a store-bought bird. That being said, thawing a turkey on the counter is a great way to introduce bacteria into the bird. And in my opinion, you should not do it. If you're behind right now, the bird is still frozen, you're kind of worried about getting it to temperature. What I do and what our turkey's doing right now, because I didn't pull ours out till last night. Actually, my son did because I was being lazy and said, "Hey, go pull the bird out of the freezer." I took a 20-quart stock pot and I stuck the turkey inside that stock pot, and it's in our sink. And I've got cold tap water on, and just a trickle. And what happens is that tap water is helping pull the cold out of the turkey, but it's doing it at a rate to where the entire time the bird is under 40 degrees. But because the water is overflowing constantly, and it's adding 55-ish degree tap water to it, it's pulling a lot of that cold out a lot faster. And that's basic. That's one of the safest ways that you can thaw a bird. Had a little bit of an internet issue, so hopefully it says the live counter's still going. So we'll see what happens there. Sorry about that, folks. Moving on. So put that turkey in the brine and let it sit for 24 hours. When I pull it out of the brine, I let it sit and kind of dry off for a bit. And I like to do a multifaceted, just kind of juiciness guarantee when it comes to the bird. And so I take and do a compound butter, and I like it simple. I'm not super crazy with stuff. I don't like a lot of sage and stuff like that. So I add butter to some Lowry seasoning salt that's softened a little bit, peel up the skin and rub around as much as I can under the skin with that butter, and leaving the butter underneath the skin, just so it'll just kind of bake in there and cause a lot of moisture. And then I take whatever's left of that, and I do a lot. I mean, we're talking probably, well, it's 2 of the 1 pound butter sticks, so 2 pounds of butter. I do about half of it like that, and then I heat up the rest of it, and I use just a poultry injector. You can buy them at Walmart for like $5, and I inject very very concisely and tightly together all around the bird, that injection, so that you just get all that butter and goodness all over the place. And I'm not talking like liquid butter. I'm talking about like barely squeezes through the syringe butter. So just a little bit more than softened. And so do that. And I've never had a dry bird doing that. It's a little over the top. Some people will do an either or. I like to do a both. So the one of the last things for the turkey is you can cook your turkey to where it comes out of the oven fairly quickly right before you eat dinner. And that's great. What I like to do is I like to cook the turkey and go ahead and rest it for an hour to 2. And you can use that same cooler that you did the brine in. Obviously, you're going to clean it really well. Dish soap, maybe a little bleach if you feel like it. Excuse me. And then I like to take and put the hottest water I can in that cooler while the bird's cooking. That's going to cause the cooler to heat up, and make it like a passive heat chamber, basically. So when the bird is done, into the cooler it goes, in one of the foil pans or something to that effect, and just let it sit in there with it closed. And that bird will maintain temperature as long as it's a good cooler for an hour or 2, no problem. And what that's going to do is allow that meat to rest, really kind of to come to a relaxed state, to where when you cut into it, all the juices aren't going to go everywhere. And so that's just a little chef's trick that I really like, that kind of adds that next step to juiciness. I mean, I want this thing just shy of its own stew, because I absolutely cannot stand dry bird, especially turkey. So you're going to cook your turkey to 165 internally. That's what everybody says, right? Or you've got those little stupid red poppers. If you bake it in the oven, pull that thing out, throw it away. One, I don't want the plastics in the bird while it's cooking anyway. 2, they suck. They very rarely work. While you're at Walmart or the store picking up the injector, go ahead and spend $12 or $14 on a cheap digital thermometer. And you will use it all the time, and it will make your cooking that much better if you don't have one. Now, if you have the meter thermometer, or a corded digital or anything like that, perfect, fantastic, that's great. I'm very surprised at how many people don't have a thermometer in their kitchen these days. So 165 is what they call done for chicken and poultry. And that's 165, boom, right now it's done. Now, in food service, those times are not exactly set in stone, and they can be a little bit more fluid. And what I mean by that is, yes, that to kill salmonella and the things we're worried about killing in the poultry, you have to hit 165. But you can also hit 150 and hold that 150 consistently without it dipping below for at least 15 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. And so I purposefully undercook the bird. There again, making it more juicy. And then when you rest it, you've got the thermometer in the bird. You can see. I take mine to 155 typically, just because I don't want to be at the very bottom cusp of that. And then if you rest it and it maintains that 155 or 150 for a couple hours, like it very well can in a properly preheated cooler, you're good to go without hitting that super dry out method. So looks like we're sitting right about 34 minutes today, and I don't want to make this drag on and on. So kind of like, recap, pro tips, thermometer. Yes. Even if it's a dial one, if you're going to go buy a new one, don't waste the money on a dial one. They're stupid. Just buy the digital one. They're so much better, so much less guesswork, and they don't require the calibration. You've got to calibrate the dial ones, especially the cheap ones, fairly often to make sure that they are actually at temperature, because they do change. And that's not a hard process, but it's a stupid process that you have to remember. Go ahead and brine that turkey, if you can, if you have the means to. You won't regret it. And then rest that turkey as long as you can. If you undercook that bird just a little bit, and say you do that 150 or 155 and let it rest, it's going to be kind of in a spa bath, right? You can always take and preheat that oven to 450 or 475 before you're ready to serve. Jam that thing in there for 5 or 6 minutes. It's going to make it crispy again on the outside. Super easy technique. And that's not enough time at that temperature to cause everything to go back to needing to rest. So hack from a caterer there. Now, what are we having for our sides for Thanksgiving? We are having sorry, my asthma's still bugging me. We're going to have your traditional, Sarah's making sourdough rolls. They are fantastic with a little bit of butter on the top. We are not eating keto or trying to eat keto at all. So sourdough rolls. Sarah's baking a loaf of sourdough tomorrow so that we can turn it into homemade dressing. It's not stuffing. Stuffing goes in the bird. I've never been a fan of stuffing in the bird. And this is a tangent here, but when you stuff the bird, you don't get enough stuffing to accomplish anything. So you're still cooking stuffing in a different container in the oven anyway, but it affects your cook time on the turkey differently. It doesn't really add anything to it. It's way easier to cook that turkey beforehand, withhold some of those juices out of the pan, and then use that in your stuffing than to try to cook the stuffing in the bird. It's just ridiculous. I don't know what Betty Crocker person came up with that and made that a thing, but I think it's dumb. You do what you want to do, but I think it's dumb. So we've got homemade dressing, and that will have some raisins and some celery and some stock in it. And it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but my mom always made it this way growing up with French bread from the store. So we're just going to tweak it a little bit and make sourdough. So double down on the carbs there. We've got a butternut squash mash that we're going to do. I'm not a big fan of like the butternut squash, and then you put the marshmallows on it and the candied nuts, and it's kind of a dessert thing. One, I can't have the nuts. Two, it's overly sweet and not as enjoyable. So I make the butternut squash and I just add a little bit of brown sugar and a little bit of maple syrup to it. And it makes it really nice. Not overly sweet, definitely sweeter than the mashed potatoes. We're going to have mashed potatoes this year. I'm trying something different. We grew huckleberry potatoes this year, so they're purple on the outside, and I've never made those into a mash. I'm going to try them this year, see if that works out. They roast really well cubed, and they're along the lines of a red potato, so they might not fare too well as a mash, but I don't care. We're going to try it. And then my wife has this recipe, I think it's a family recipe, for this cranberry relish. We don't do cranberry sauce. We don't do it out of a can, the can shaped mold. We don't do homemade cooked down cranberry sauce. My wife had this recipe where you took cranberries and you took an orange and you took sugar and you put it all into the food processor and you whirl it all up. And I hated it. It wasn't very good, but I figured out how to fix it. And I think everybody enjoys it that much better. Whereas instead of just putting the whole orange in, you get the pith of the peel and the insides and stuff. You take your cranberries and then you add your fresh squeezed orange juice to it. But before you squeeze the orange juice, you zest the orange and you use the orange zest. So you're getting all of the oily goodness of the orange. You're getting the sweet to go with the tart. And it is literally just whirled in the food processor and let to rest, typically 24 hours beforehand. So this is a Wednesday make. It's never heated, never cooked, served cold. And it's actually pretty darn good. So we've got that going on. And then, like I said, probably going to cheat and roll into Costco and pick up a pumpkin pie. And I don't know if I'm forgetting anything else, but that's probably what we're looking at. Comment down below what you're going to have. Shoot me an email. Let me know how your Thanksgiving was, how your plans are going. If you have any tips yourself, or if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Been a professional chef for a few years now. I've been cooking a lot for a lot of years, including when both my parents worked and I was, helping cook dinner a couple nights a week when I was 11 years old. So anyway, folks, with Preparing for Prosperity, I'm AJ Harrison. We're preparing for prosperity on all the socials except for YouTube. You can find me at AJ Harrison on there. Got the cool little P with the cutout symbol, just like the podcast on there. Shoot me an email, preparingforprosperity@proton.me. And yeah, we'll have a freeze dryer episode on Wednesday, and we'll see you again Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time for the live. All right, guys, have a great week. Happy Thanksgiving.